At 0847 on the morning of January 3rd, 1944, Major Gregory Boyington banked his F-4U Corsair over Rabaul Harbor and counted the Japanese fighters swarming up to meet him. 40 of them. Maybe more, rising from the most heavily defended Japanese base in the Pacific, like hornets from a kicked nest. Boyington was 31 years old, ancient by fighter pilot standards. The Marines called him Pappy because he was a decade older than most of his squadron mates. He had already shot down 25 enemy aircraft, tying the American record held by Captain Joe Foss. One more kill would make him the leading ace of the Pacific War. The mission that morning was a fighter sweep over Rabaul, the massive Japanese stronghold on the island of New Britain. Intelligence estimated that 300 enemy aircraft were based there, protected by anti-aircraft batteries that could fill the sky with steel. American planners wanted those aircraft destroyed before they could threaten the advancing Allied forces. Boyington led 48 Corsairs from 3 Marine squadrons toward the target. His own unit, VMF 214, flew in the lead formation. They called themselves the Black Sheep Squadron, a collection of misfits, troublemakers, and replacement pilots that Boyington had forged into the most effective fighter unit in the Pacific. The Corsair was a brutal machine. Its massive Pratt and Whitney engine produced 2,000 horsepower, enough to push the aircraft past 400 miles per hour in level flight. 6. 50 caliber machine guns protruded from its distinctive inverted gull wings. Japanese pilots had learned to fear the bent-wing bird. They called it whistling death because of the sound its air intakes made during attack dives. Boyington had been flying combat missions for years before most of his pilots had ever touched an airplane. He had fought with the Flying Tigers in China, shooting down Japanese bombers over Rangoon when America was still officially at peace. He had killed his first enemy pilot in 1941, nearly 3 years before this morning over Rabaul. Now he was hunting for number 26. The Japanese fighters climbed in disciplined formations. Zeros mostly, the nimble Mitsubishi A-6M that had dominated the Pacific skies in the first year of the war. Fast, maneuverable, and deadly in the hands of experienced pilots. But the Zero had weaknesses. No armor, no self-sealing fuel tanks. A single burst of 50 caliber fire could turn one into a fireball. Boyington pushed his throttle forward and dove toward the rising enemy formation. His wingman, Captain George Ashman, stayed close on his right. Behind them, the rest of the Black Sheep followed their leader into the fight. The first Zero crossed Boyington's gun sight at 15,000 feet. He pressed the trigger. 6 machine guns roared. The Japanese fighter exploded in a ball of orange flame. 26. Boyington rolled away from the debris and immediately found another target. A second Zero was climbing toward Ashman's tail. Boyington dropped onto its 6 o'clock position and fired a long burst. The Zero's wings separated from the fuselage. The pilot tumbled out without a parachute. 27. The sky above Rabaul became a swirling chaos of aircraft. Corsairs and Zeros twisted through smoke and tracer fire. Radio discipline collapsed. Pilots screamed warnings and curses and calls for help. Anti-aircraft fire from the ships in the harbor added to the confusion, black bursts of flak that endangered friend and enemy alike. Boyington's fuel gauge was dropping fast. Combat maneuvering burned fuel at an enormous rate. He had perhaps 20 minutes of fighting time before he would have to turn for home. A Zero appeared directly ahead, flying straight and level. The Japanese pilot had not seen him. Boyington steadied his aim and pressed the trigger. Nothing happened. His guns had jammed, all 6 of them, the most critical moment of his career, and his weapons had failed. The Zero pilot spotted him and immediately rolled into an attack. Boyington hauled back on his stick and pulled into a climbing turn. Without guns, he was defenseless. His only option was to run. But there was nowhere to run. If you want to see what happened when Papy Boyington's guns jammed over the most heavily defended Japanese base in the Pacific, please hit that like button. It helps us share these forgotten stories with more people. And please subscribe if you haven't already. Back to Boyington. More Zeros converged on the unarmed Corsair. They had seen his guns fall silent. They knew he could not fight back. Boyington counted 5 of them, forming up for the kill. He kicked his rudder, and threw the Corsair into a violent, evasive maneuver. The big fighter responded instantly, rolling and diving with power that the lighter Zeros could not match. Boyington had been dogfighting since before some of these Japanese pilots had learned to fly. He knew every trick, every technique, every way to make an airplane do things its designers never intended. A Zero got behind him and opened fire. 20mm cannon rounds punched through his wing. Boyington felt the impacts through the seat of his pants. He pulled into a tight spiral, trying to throw off the attacker's aim. More rounds struck the Corsair. The engine began trailing smoke. The aircraft shuddered as something critical broke inside the cowling. Boyington looked down. Rabaul Harbor was directly below. If he bailed out here, he would land in the water surrounded by Japanese ships. Capture or death. Those were his only options. A cannon round struck the fuselage behind his seat. The explosion threw shrapnel into his left thigh and shoulder. Blood sprayed across the cockpit. The pain was immediate and intense. The engine was dying. Flames licked from the cowling. Boyington reached for the canopy release. Another cannon round hit the cockpit. This one struck his left leg, shattering bone. Boyington screamed into his oxygen mask. His hand found the canopy release and pulled. The canopy flew away. Wind rushed into the cockpit, feeding the flames. Boyington rolled the dying Corsair onto its back and dropped out. He was at 800 feet, barely enough altitude for his parachute to open. He pulled the ripcord and felt the brutal jerk as the silk canopy deployed. The Zeros circled him as he descended. One of them made a pass, machine guns blazing. Rounds cracked past Boyington's head. Another Zero lined up for a strafing run. Boyington hung helplessly in his parachute straps, unable to fight, unable to run. Blood poured from his wounds. The water below was growing closer. He had perhaps 30 seconds until impact. The second Zero opened fire. Bullets shredded the air around him. One round grazed his scalp, opening a wound that bled profusely. Then, inexplicably, the Japanese pilots broke off. They had seen something. Boyington looked up and spotted American Corsairs diving toward the Zeros. The rescue attempt would fail, but it gave him a few precious seconds without being shot at. Boyington hit the water hard. The impact stunned him. His wounded leg folded beneath him as he plunged beneath the surface. Salt water filled his wounds, sending fresh waves of agony through his body. He struggled to release his parachute harness. The silk was settling over him, threatening to drag him under. His left arm barely responded. His left leg was useless. He was bleeding into the water, which would attract sharks. Boyington inflated his Mae West life jacket and surfaced, gasping. The parachute had drifted away. He was alone in Rabaul Harbor, surrounded by enemies, wounded in at least 4 places, with no weapon and no way to call for rescue. A Japanese patrol boat spotted him within minutes. Sailors hauled him aboard and threw him onto the deck. They searched him roughly, ignoring his screams as they manipulated his shattered leg. They found his dog tags, his emergency kit, his service pistol that he had been unable to reach. An officer appeared and stared down at the bleeding American. He asked a question in Japanese. Boyington did not understand the words. The officer kicked him in the wounded leg. Boyington passed out from the pain. Gregory Boyington was born on December 4th, 1912, in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. His mother, Grace Gregory, was 16 years old and unmarried. His biological father, Charles Boyington, had abandoned the family before Gregory was born. The shame of illegitimacy in 1912 was profound. Grace told her son that his father had died, a lie that Boyington would not discover until decades later. Grace married Ellsworth Hallenbeck when Gregory was a year old. Hallenbeck adopted the boy and gave him his name. For most of his childhood, Gregory believed Hallenbeck was his biological father. The truth would eventually emerge, but by then the damage was done. Boyington grew up feeling that something was fundamentally wrong with his identity, that he did not quite belong in the family that raised him. The Hallenbeck family moved frequently during Gregory's childhood. Tacoma, Washington, Okanogan, Washington, St. Mary's, Idaho. Each move meant new schools, new classmates, new fights to establish himself in the social hierarchy. Gregory was small for his age until adolescence, then shot up rapidly. By high school, he was a stocky, muscular young man with a talent for wrestling and a chip on his shoulder the size of Montana. He drank his first beer at 14. He got into his first serious fight at 15. He developed a reputation as someone who would never back down, never admit defeat, never stop swinging until the other guy stayed down. Wrestling became his salvation. The sport rewarded aggression, determination, and the ability to ignore pain. Gregory excelled at it. He won the Pacific Northwest Intercollegiate Wrestling Championship in 1930, pinning opponents with a ferocity that sometimes alarmed spectators. He enrolled at the University of Washington on a partial wrestling scholarship. The rest of his expenses he covered by working in a gold mine during summers, brutal labor that built muscle and calluses. He studied aeronautical engineering because he had become fascinated with aviation. The idea of flying, of escaping the ground, and all its limitations had taken hold of his imagination. He joined the university's ROTC program, drilling in Army uniforms on weekends, learning the basics of military discipline. The Army offered a path to flight training. Boyington wanted that path desperately. But college was expensive, and Boyington was poor. He worked multiple jobs while carrying a full academic load. The stress manifested in his drinking, which had already become a problem by his sophomore year. He would go on binges that lasted for days, missing classes, getting into fights, waking up in places he did not remember going. His first marriage came in 1934 to Helen Clark, a woman he had known for only a few months. The wedding was hurried because Helen was pregnant. Boyington was 21 years old, about to graduate, deeply in debt, and now responsible for a wife and coming child. He graduated from the University of Washington in 1934 with a degree in aeronautical engineering. The degree was nearly worthless. The Great Depression had crushed the aviation industry. No one was hiring young engineers with no experience in drinking problems. Boyington took a job as a draftsman at Boeing for $85 a month. It was not enough to support a family. His first son, Gregory Jr., was born in 1935. A second child, Janet, followed in 1937. A third, Gloria, came in 1939. The marriage was a disaster from the beginning. Boyington drank. Helen complained about his drinking. Boyington drank more. The cycle accelerated until neither of them could remember why they had married in the first place. In 1935, Boyington found escape. The Marine Corps was accepting applications for flight training. They would pay him to learn to fly. They would take him away from his failing marriage and his dead-end job and give him something he had wanted since childhood. He applied and was accepted. In February 1936, he reported to Naval Air Station Pensacola for flight training. The Marines nearly washed him out 3 times. His flying was excellent, but his discipline was terrible. He showed up drunk for inspections. He got into fights with fellow cadets. He accumulated demerits at a rate that alarmed his instructors. But he could fly. God, could he fly. The instructors had rarely seen natural talent like his. Boyington seemed to understand aircraft instinctively, to feel what they wanted to do and how to make them do it. He soloed early. He mastered aerobatics easily. He landed on aircraft carriers with the calm precision of a veteran while his classmates white-knuckled their approaches. The Marines decided his flying ability outweighed his personal problems. They gave him his wings in 1937 and assigned him to a fighter squadron. Second, Lieutenant Gregory Boyington began his military career as a Marine aviator. He would end it as the most decorated fighter pilot in Marine Corps history. The late 1930s were frustrating years for American military pilots. While Germany and Japan built massive air forces and tested them in combat, American aviators flew obsolete biplanes and participated in peacetime exercises that bore no resemblance to actual warfare. Boyington's squadron flew Grumman F-3, F-2 biplanes, fabric-covered relics that would have been slaughtered by the modern fighters, then entering service in Europe and Asia. The pilots knew their aircraft were inadequate. They also knew that Congress was unlikely to fund replacements until war actually began. Boyington's drinking continued. His marriage continued its slow collapse. He accumulated debts he could not pay and responsibilities he could not meet. By 1940, he owed money to half the businesses in Pensacola. His credit was destroyed. His reputation was in ruins. The Marine Corps gave him a choice: resign or face a court-martial for conduct unbecoming an officer. Boyington chose resignation. In August 1941, he left the Marines with nothing but his debts and his demons. He was 28 years old, divorced, unemployed, unemployable in any respectable field. The only skill he possessed was flying, and no American airline would hire a pilot with his record. Then he heard about the Flying Tigers. The Central Aircraft Manufacturing Company was recruiting pilots for China. The job paid $600 a month, more than 3 times what Boyington had made as a Marine. The contract included a bonus of $500 for every enemy aircraft destroyed. The mission was to defend the Burma Road, China's only remaining supply line from the outside world, against Japanese bombers. The recruiters did not mention that the job was technically illegal. The United States was not at war with Japan. American citizens who fought for foreign governments violated federal law. The pilots would be mercenaries, soldiers of fortune fighting for money rather than country. Boyington did not care. He needed money. He needed to fly. He needed to escape everything his life had become. He signed the contract in August 1941 and boarded a ship for Asia. The American Volunteer Group assembled in Burma under the command of Claire Chennault, a retired Army Air Corps officer who had been serving as an advisor to the Chinese Air Force. Chennault had studied Japanese tactics extensively. He knew how they flew, how they fought, how they could be beaten. The AVG received 100 Curtiss P-40 Tomahawk fighters, aircraft that were already considered obsolete by American standards. The P-40 was slower than the Japanese Zero and could not match its maneuverability, but it was heavily armed, well-armored, and could dive faster than anything the Japanese flew. Chennault developed tactics that exploited these advantages. Never dogfight a Zero. Never try to turn with one. Use altitude and speed. Dive on the enemy, fire a burst, and climb back up before they can react. Hit and run, hit and run, hit and run. The AVG pilots trained through the autumn of 1941 while the world moved toward war. On December 7th, Japanese aircraft attacked Pearl Harbor. On December 8th, Japanese forces invaded Burma. Boyington flew his first combat mission on December 23rd, 1941. Japanese bombers were attacking Rangoon. The Flying Tigers scrambled to intercept. The P-40 climbed slowly, straining to reach the enemy formation. Boyington's hands were sweating on the stick. He had never fired a gun in anger. He had never tried to kill another human being. The Japanese bombers appeared above him, twin-engine Mitsubishis flying in tight formation. Their fighter escort was nowhere in sight. Chennault's intelligence had been perfect. The bombers were unprotected. Boyington climbed into the attack. He picked out a bomber on the edge of the formation and pressed the trigger. The P-40's 6 machine guns roared. Tracer rounds streaked toward the target. The bomber's right engine exploded. The aircraft rolled onto its side and began a long spiral toward the jungle below. Boyington watched it fall, waiting for parachutes that never appeared. He had just killed at least 6 men. He felt nothing but satisfaction. Boyington claimed 3.5 victories with the Flying Tigers before the group disbanded in July 1942. The official records would later question some of these claims, but Boyington insisted until his death that he had shot down 6 Japanese aircraft during his time in China. His performance with the AVG was exemplary. His behavior was not. He drank heavily, got into fights with other pilots, and clashed repeatedly with Chennault's leadership. When the AVG was absorbed into the Army Air Forces, Boyington was not invited to stay. He was talking about himself. The mission to Rabaul on January 3rd, 1944, was supposed to make Boyington the undisputed champion of American fighter aces. He tied the record early in the fight, then may have scored 1 or 2 more victories before his guns jammed. The exact count would never be determined. Records were sketchy. Witnesses disagreed. What is certain is that Gregory Boyington, the Black Sheep commander, was shot down over enemy territory and presumed dead. The Marine Corps announced that Major Boyington was missing in action. His mother received a telegram. His children were told that their father might not be coming home. The Black Sheep held a memorial service and continued flying missions, now led by other officers. The war moved on. The Gilbert Islands fell to American forces. The Marshalls followed. The Great Island Hopping Campaign pushed relentlessly toward Japan. Gregory Boyington spent those months in a living hell. The Japanese patrol boat that pulled him from Rabaul Harbor transported him to a military facility on the island. His wounds received minimal treatment. A Japanese doctor set his broken leg without anesthesia, a procedure that caused Boyington to pass out from pain. They bandaged his other wounds with strips of cloth and left him in a cell. The interrogations began immediately. Japanese intelligence officers wanted to know about American aircraft, tactics, and plans. They wanted the names of other pilots, the locations of bases, the schedules of missions. Boyington told them nothing of value. He gave name, rank, and serial number. When pressed, he invented ridiculous lies. He claimed the Corsair had a secret weapon that could shoot around corners. He described non-existent bases on imaginary islands. He made up the names of pilots and officers who did not exist. The Japanese responded with beatings. They hit him with bamboo rods. They kicked his wounded leg. They withheld food and water. They kept him awake for days at a time. Boyington's body was already weakened by wounds and blood loss. The torture pushed him to the edge of death. His leg became infected. Fever gripped him. He hallucinated conversations with dead friends and family members. After 3 weeks on Rabaul, he was transported to a prisoner of war camp near Yokohama, Japan. The journey took 2 weeks. He traveled in the hold of a cargo ship, packed with other prisoners, with no sanitation and minimal food. The camp at Ofuna was not a regular POW facility. It was a secret interrogation center, a place where the Japanese held prisoners they considered especially valuable. The International Red Cross did not know it existed. The prisoners' families were not notified. The men held there simply vanished. Ofuna's commandant believed in breaking prisoners through systematic brutality. Guards beat inmates daily for infractions real and imagined. Food rations were calculated to keep prisoners alive, but constantly hungry. Medical care was virtually non-existent. Boyington arrived at Ofuna in February 1944. He would not leave until the war ended, 20 months later. The routine at Ofuna was designed to destroy the human spirit. Prisoners woke at dawn and performed calisthenics under guard supervision. They spent the day performing pointless labor or sitting in their cells, forbidden to speak to each other. At random intervals, guards would burst into the cells and beat the occupants for no apparent reason. Meals consisted of rice, often mixed with chaff or dirt. Occasionally, vegetable scraps or tiny portions of fish were added. The caloric intake was far below what the human body needed for survival. Prisoners lost weight steadily, their muscles wasting away, their bones becoming visible beneath their skin. Boyington's wounds healed slowly in these conditions. His leg set improperly and would cause him pain for the rest of his life. The scalp wound from the strafing attack left a permanent scar. His body, once powerful from years of athletics, became gaunt and weak. But his spirit remained intact. Boyington refused to break. He defied the guards at every opportunity, smuggling food to weaker prisoners, passing messages through the camp's clandestine communication network, maintaining his identity as a Marine Corps officer despite everything the Japanese did to strip it away. The prisoners at Ofuna developed strategies for survival. They learned which guards could be manipulated and which ones were genuinely dangerous. They memorized the interrogators' techniques and developed countermeasures. They supported each other through the darkest moments, when giving up seemed easier than continuing to fight. Boyington emerged as a leader among the prisoners. His combat record earned their respect. His defiance of the guards earned their admiration. He organized resistance activities, helped maintain morale, and reminded his fellow prisoners that they were soldiers, not victims. The beatings intensified when the guards discovered his leadership role. They singled him out for special punishment. They kept him in solitary confinement for weeks at a time. They reduced his already meager rations until he was barely receiving enough calories to survive. None of it worked. Boyington had spent his entire life fighting against authority. The Japanese were just another enemy to resist. By the summer of 1945, the prisoners at Ofuna knew the war was ending. American bombers passed overhead daily, beyond the reach of Japanese interceptors. The guards became nervous, uncertain of what would happen when the Americans arrived. On August 6, 1945, an atomic bomb destroyed Hiroshima. 3 days later, a second bomb destroyed Nagasaki. On August 15th, Emperor Hirohito announced Japan's surrender. The prisoners at Ofuna learned of the surrender through their secret radio network. They gathered in their cells and listened as the news spread through whispered conversations. After years of captivity, after beatings and starvation, and the constant threat of execution, they were going to live. Gregory Boyington walked out of Ofuna on August 29th, 1945, 20 months after his capture over Rabaul. He weighed less than 120 pounds. His body was covered with scars from beatings and wounds. His leg still ached from the improperly healed break. But he was alive. Against all odds, against everything the Japanese had done to kill him, he was alive. American forces evacuated the Ofuna prisoners to a hospital ship offshore. Medical personnel examined Boyington and documented his injuries. He had lost nearly 60 pounds during his captivity. His leg would require surgery to correct the damage from improper healing. His body bore the marks of systematic abuse. The doctors told him he was lucky to be alive. Boyington knew they were right. News of his survival reached the United States within hours. The Marine Corps major, who had been presumed dead for 20 months, was coming home. His mother collapsed when she received the telegram. His children, who had grown accustomed to a world without their father, struggled to process the news. The press coverage was immediate and intense. Gregory Papy Boyington, the Black Sheep commander, the leading Marine Corps ace of the war. He had tied the record before being shot down. Now the Marine Corps wanted to know, had he scored any additional victories in that final battle? The investigation was complicated by the chaos of combat and the passage of time. Witnesses disagreed about what they had seen. Boyington himself could not confirm his exact kill count from the mission. Gun camera footage had been lost when his aircraft crashed. The Marine Corps ultimately credited Boyington with 28 confirmed aerial victories, 22 with the Black Sheep and 6 with the Flying Tigers. This made him the leading Marine Corps ace of the war, ahead of Joe Foss, who had held the record until January 3, 1944. On October 5, 1945, President Harry Truman presented Gregory Boyington with the Medal of Honor at the White House. The citation praised his extraordinary heroism and valiant devotion to duty as commanding officer of Marine Fighting Squadron, 214 inches action against enemy Japanese forces. Boyington stood in his dress uniform, thinner than he had been before the war, marked by wounds and captivity, but unbowed. He had survived everything the Japanese could throw at him. He had led his Black Sheep to victories that changed the course of the Pacific Air War. He had endured 20 months of brutal imprisonment without breaking. He was a hero. The Marine Corps said so. The President said so. The newspapers said so. Gregory Boyington did not feel like a hero. He felt like a drunk who had somehow managed to stay alive. The homecoming was triumphant and hollow at the same time. Boyington participated in war bond drives and gave speeches to adoring crowds. He was promoted to colonel. He received decorations from multiple nations. He was, for a brief moment, one of the most famous men in America. But fame did not pay the debts he had accumulated before the war. Fame did not repair his relationships with his children, who barely knew him. Fame did not silence the demons that drove him to drink. Boyington left the Marine Corps in 1947 and descended into a personal hell that mirrored his captivity. He drank heavily, went through multiple marriages, held jobs briefly before losing them. The war hero became a cautionary tale. a man whose greatest accomplishments were behind him. He married 4 times. His first marriage to Helen Clark had ended before the war. His second marriage, to Lucy Malcolmson, lasted from 1946 to 1947. His third marriage, to Josephine Mosman, lasted from 1958 to 1959. His fourth marriage, to Josephine Wilson, lasted from 1967 until her death in 1975. Each marriage followed the same pattern: initial happiness, escalating drinking, violent arguments, and eventual collapse. Boyington could not sustain intimate relationships any better than he could sustain sobriety. The children from his first marriage grew up without him. They saw their father occasionally, usually when he was between wives or jobs. They loved him, but did not know him. The war hero their schoolmates admired was a stranger who appeared and disappeared unpredictably. Boyington tried various careers. He worked as a referee for professional wrestling. He sold beer for a brewery. He appeared on television game shows. None of it lasted. The only thing he truly knew how to do was fly and fight, and the peacetime world had no use for either skill. In 1958, he published his autobiography, Black Sheep. The book was raw, honest, and unapologetic. Boyington did not pretend to be the sanitized hero the Marine Corps wanted. He wrote about his drinking, his failed marriages, his conflicts with authority. He admitted that he had been a mercenary in China, fighting for money rather than patriotism. The book became a bestseller. Readers responded to its honesty. Here was a war hero who admitted his flaws, who refused to pretend that combat had made him a better person. The celebrity that followed gave Boyington another chance at financial stability. He became a popular speaker on the lecture circuit. He attended air shows and veterans' reunions. He met men who had served under him in the Black Sheep and heard their stories of what had happened after he was shot down. The squadron had continued flying until the war ended. They produced additional aces and compiled one of the most impressive combat records in Marine Corps history. The legacy Boyington had created outlived his command. In 1976, NBC Television produced a series based on his autobiography. Black Sheep starred Robert Conrad as Boyington and ran for 2 seasons. The series took enormous liberties with historical accuracy, portraying the Black Sheep as free-spirited rogues who fought the Japanese while defying their own command structure. Boyington served as a technical advisor for the series. He appeared in several episodes as a character called General Kenyon. The show brought him renewed fame and, more importantly, steady income. But the series also complicated his legacy. Viewers could not distinguish between the television fantasy and the historical reality. The real Black Sheep had been disciplined combat aviators, not the lovable misfits of the TV show. Boyington himself was more complex than Robert Conrad's portrayal, darker and more troubled. The fame from the television series faded, as all fame does. Boyington continued drinking, continued struggling, continued fighting the demons that had pursued him since childhood. He died on January 11th, 1988, in Fresno, California. He was 75 years old. Lung cancer killed him, a disease linked to the heavy smoking he had maintained throughout his life. He died as he had lived, defiantly, without apology, refusing to pretend to be something he was not. The Marine Corps buried him with full military honors at Arlington National Cemetery. The Medal of Honor recipient, the leading Marine Corps ace, the survivor of 20 months as a prisoner of war. Whatever his personal failures, he had earned his place among the honored dead. His grave marker lists his name, his rank, and his dates of service. It does not mention the drinking or the failed marriages or the years of struggle. It remembers only the hero, the fighter, the man who refused to die. The Black Sheep Squadron remains famous 80 years after its disbandment. Veterans groups keep the memory alive. Historians debate the accuracy of Boyington's claims and the truth of his autobiography. The television series, now considered a camp classic, introduces new generations to a fictionalized version of his story. But the real Gregory Boyington was more interesting than any fictionalization. He was a man of extraordinary courage and profound flaws. He could kill enemy aircraft with surgical precision and destroy his own life with equal efficiency. He inspired men to follow him into combat and drove away the women who tried to love him. He was not a simple hero. He was a complicated man who did heroic things. The distinction matters. Boyington's legacy in Marine Corps aviation is secure. He proved that misfits could become elite fighters when properly led. He demonstrated that personal demons did not disqualify someone from extraordinary achievement. He showed that survival was possible even when the odds seemed impossible. The pilots who served under him remembered a leader who shared their dangers and celebrated their victories. The prisoners who survived Ofuna with him remembered a man who never stopped resisting, never stopped fighting, never stopped being a Marine. "Show me a hero," he said, "and I'll show you a bum." He was right about himself. He was both. The hero and the bum existed in the same body, fought the same battles, struggled with the same demons. Neither could exist without the other. Gregory Boyington shot down 28 enemy aircraft, more than any other Marine in history. He survived 20 months as a prisoner of war under conditions designed to break him. He received the Medal of Honor from the President of the United States. He also drank himself through 4 marriages, abandoned his children, and spent years in poverty and obscurity. He made enemies of people who tried to help him and pushed away those who loved him. This is not a contradiction. This is what a human being looks like when viewed completely, with all the virtues and all the vices in full view. Boyington never asked to be sanitized. He never claimed to be better than he was. He was Papy Boyington, the Black Sheep Commander, the man who fell from the sky over Rabaul and refused to die. He was also Gregory Boyington, the drunk, the deadbeat father, the man who could not stop fighting even when there was no enemy left to fight. Both men are worth remembering. Both men are part of the story. On January 3rd, 1944, Major Gregory Boyington's guns jammed over Rabaul Harbor. The Japanese shot him down, wounded him 4 times, and captured him. They spent 20 months trying to break him. They failed. The Black Sheep Commander came home. He received his medal. He told his story. He lived another 43 years, fighting different battles, winning some and losing others. In the end, he is remembered for what he did in the air over the Pacific. The dogfights, the victories, the leadership that turned rejects into aces. The courage that kept him shooting even as his aircraft disintegrated around him. That is enough. That is the legacy he earned. Gregory Pappy Boyington, Medal of Honor, 28 confirmed aerial victories, 20 months as a prisoner of war. The black sheep who refused to die. If this story moved you the way it moved us, do me a favor. Hit that like button. Every single like tells YouTube to show this story to more people. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. We rescue forgotten stories from dusty archives every single day. Stories about fighter aces who fall from the sky and refuse to give up. Misfits who become heroes. Real people, real heroism. Drop a comment right now and tell us where you are watching from. Are you watching from the United States, United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, Japan? Our community stretches across the entire world. You are not just a viewer. You are part of keeping these memories alive. Tell us your location. Tell us if someone in your family served. Tell us if you remember watching the Black Sheep television series. Just let us know you are here. Thank you for watching, and thank you for making sure Papy Boyington does not disappear into silence. These men deserve to be remembered, and you are helping make that happen. He was a hero. He was a bum. He was both things at once, and that made him human. That is the story. That is the legacy. That is Papy Boyington.